All right, hey everybody. So this is Josh Bruce, and we're going to try something different. We're going to check out a different format because I'm not really digging where the other one's going. One, they seem really long. Two, with a lot of like pauses, like long pauses, um, lots of editing and whatnot. And while that does demonstrate the purpose of being unscripted and what is it like to be a developer, including searching, the web for answers and solutions. Um, the format does not lend itself to the medium, and the audience. I mean, even I get bored listening to it. I'm just kind of like, man, is there a point to this? So I'm going to be trying something different. So we're continuing with Shoop, and the other thing is that given how far ahead I am in videos, given how much work I've been doing on Amos and Shoop and a bunch of other things, yeah, it'll be basically like 2050 before we get all the videos out, and I will have come up with even more interesting ways of dealing with code. So anyhow, so Shoop is meant to replicate roughly the Swift standard library of base data types, right? So basically, you have a string, and that's a data type, and basically you can come down here, there we go, and get to all of the methods, right? So we have this initializer, so on and so forth, and that's um, sort of how we've been building it, right? So if you want to take a look at ES string, the first 20 videos focus mainly on ES string, well, solely on ES string, because it was just an experiment, as with most things. So instead of basically recording me going through this or making that the video, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go through the diff. Okay. So if you don't know what a diff is, basically it's when you use git, you have the idea of a commit, and you just basically make a bunch of changes to a file and you say, okay, I'm committed to this change, right? And what the diff does is it says from the last commit to this new commit, what has changed, right? So from the Shoop 3 commit, which would have been covered by the last video that we published on Shoop, we've changed 6 files. Now these upper ones are basically just Xcode, and so you can see I'm testing out to see what does quotient and remainder do from the standard library, and then figuring out how to replicate that here in Shoop itself. Right? We're still doing test-driven development, so you can see this is me adding in all of the tests to make sure that we can get the quotient and remainder, we can get all of these things. So anyway, for this commit, basically we're finishing up ESInt. We added is multiple of, and as you can see, we can we're starting to use the methods that we've already created, right? Because if you want to check to see if something is a multiple of something else, you can just see if it has a remainder when you divide by that thing. And so here we just said, does it equal 0 or not? We're also starting to return our own classes. So we're evolving even farther away from PHP, or further. I can't remember which one to use in that context, but quotient and remainder basically gives us a tuple, and we'll get to tuple here in a second. Negate, as you can see, instead of doing this math here, right, this int -1 times this int, and then return this, literally just feed it into ESInt and say this product, and we'll get to some of those, or get to those methods here in a second. And then here we also decreased, right? We deleted, basically that's what the red means. We deleted these 5 lines of code where we were checking stuff out, and instead basically said, here you go, this is it. And of course replace the other line as well. Advanced, I still don't know if advanced is really necessary or what it's supposed to do, but it's in the standard library that we're mimicking, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. And then now we have basic arithmetic, right? So you have sum, which does the addition, difference, which does the subtraction, product, which does multiplication, quotient, which is basically going to divide the integer by a given number, and yeah, it's basically the result of division. So, and then round it down because it's an integer, it's not a float, it doesn't get, point whatever. And then with remainder, we're basically going to say, divide the int by the divisor, and whatever remains, remains, and give us that. So I did go ahead and create tuple, which tuple is really just an array. It's an associative array, right? So it has string keys instead of numeric keys, but that's how we roll. And again, we went through doing test-driven development. All right, so don't pay attention to these numbers. They're actually incorrect, and I can't remember what this one was all about. We did add the editor config, so to make sure that our PHP is styled well with regard to whitespace. Apparently some stuff changed up in the Xcode land again. Did some interesting work, at least I think it's interesting, work with ESBool. Specifically what we did is we added an interface, this equatable interface. So let's take a look at that. And it's basically just is same as, is not same as, and then you give it a comparison. And that comparison needs to also inherit or implement the equatable interface. And it's sort of the first step that we took into doing something with interfaces. And so if you're into foreshadowing, that's kind of it. And we also updated the way we do toggle, which is to return an ESBool. And so again, we were already doing it, starting to try to get everything to use Shoop, but now we're stepping a little bit farther into it, I think. And again, heavy on the foreshadowing. So we also created an interface called comparable, which basically is, is it less than or greater than, and that sort of a thing. So you can't do that with a bool, but you can do it with an int. So we went ahead and did that, and updated quotient and remainder to basically move the setup into the actual return of the tuple itself. And then here is our implementation of is same as, is not same as, so on and so forth. Because if we come into comparable, wow, I didn't actually make those abstract. That's lame. We have to implement our own, interfaces. Sorry. So when you have an interface, basically what you're saying is, if you conform to this interface, then I expect there to be a method called isLessThan, right? So it's a contract that you make with the outside world. And same thing with equatable. We brought in or created ESRange, which is basically going to give us a min, max, and also whether or not we should include the last digit if we say do a loop or something like that. So we also introduced the concept of is empty. We already went over comparable and equatable. So here are the tests, right? We're just updating the tests to make sure that, what are we doing here? Oh, so we basically made toggle return ESBool, and then we're going to unwrap it, right? So this is where we start introducing the notion of, all right, we're going from PHP, right? PHP land into Shoop-land. So we're going to wrap everything that's in Shoop-land in a nice comfy blanket, and then we can manipulate and play around and do all sorts of interesting things while we're in Shoop-land, and then we're going to have to exit, right? And that bool, that call to bool, is that exit, okay? And we do the same thing with numbers test. ESInt from float, from double. Yeah, just making sure that we're dropping essentially anything after the dot, the decimal place. Then we have range test, so we're making sure that ES range is working, so good times on that. All right, so next up, now I really don't remember what the hell was going on. Looks like we're checking some stuff with range. Yeah, okay. So let's go into ESInt. So here with ESInt, we're basically requiring everything that we pass in. Like if you pass it in, it's going to be an ESInt. And I was digging that from the perspective of we could manipulate things easier and interact with them easier. But I wasn't digging it from the perspective that now you see, like when we call this product, now we have to initialize this ESInt, whereas before we could just pass in a PHP value. So that was kind of annoying. I also, instead of saying sum, I said plus. I can't remember why I decided to do that. I might even change it to add, and then like change this to subtract, but who knows. But anyway, yeah, just passing in ESInt instead of an actual PHP integer. We've got ESRange is now conforming to iterator and countable, as well as our own equatable. Range as values. Can't remember what we did there. And then, so basically what we're doing here is PHP actually has a range method. So if we come back over to the PHP docs, right, you can basically say, give me the start, give me the end, and then what are the steps, right? And so that's pretty much all we're doing. And this returns an array of all the numbers in between. So if we take a look down here, range 0 to 12, basically you get an array 0 to 12. Or if you do 0 to 100, step 10, you get 10 integers, but they're also 10 apart, right? So so that's what that's all about. Yeah, just look at that constructor. Min, max, include last. Anyhow, so then we put in everything for the iterator. So current, basically what it's looking at is the array, and because the array actually stores like a little marker of where it is and where it needs to be next. Minus this min. Yeah, so we're just basically dealing with that. Now what I did like about this new way of unfolding things is that I didn't have to unfold when I made the call. I could just say this min and basically not have to unwrap it until the absolute end where I was looking for that bool. So that was nice. Then we have count, lower bound, upper bound. Also checking whether or not the range contains a number. So that was helpful. And clamped to, I can't remember what clamped to was about. Oh, yeah, basically you could change it, right? You could change the upper and lower bounds by passing in a range that would clamp it to things. And so what we're having to do here is grab the min, see if it's greater than our current min, and if it is, then go ahead and replace it. And then doing the same thing with max, only to see if it's less, right? So if you started with 0 through 10, and then passed 7 through 9, then you would get 7 through 9. But if you passed 0 to 10 and then passed in 2 through 9, or no, 2 through 12, it would be 2 through 12. And I just thought that was, it was interesting. I couldn't see a time where we actually would want to do that. And we're kind of really getting into this functional notion where we're returning new instances of everything. So why not just reinstantiate or instantiate the new one? So couldn't figure out a use case, but it's in there because that's what we do. So we have our tests, right? You can see checking out lower bound, so on and so forth. The clamped 2, so 8, 500. And then when we, so it's going to take the lower of the maxes and the higher of the mins. So anyway, some good testing going on there. And with that said, that's going to be it for this video. So technically we covered 3 other videos, which is basically an hour and a half and 15 minutes or so. And I am going to try to keep these at about 15-20 minutes because I think half an hour is just, especially when we start getting into some of the videos that are like an hour long, it's just too much. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to do that. I love getting feedback. There's only so much I can do staring into the darkness. But let me know what you think about this format, and I'm going to start seeing if I like this format. With that said, as always, thank you so much for making the time. I definitely do appreciate it, and I'll see you around.